The vastness of space rippled as the Zalzor fleet emerged from the void, a procession of blackened warships gliding into orbit above Earth. Their hulls, jagged and predatory, reflected the pale blue light of the planet below. High Commander Vexer stood at the command bridge of the vanguard of ruin, his mandibles clicking together in satisfaction. Another world, ripe for conquest. His species had never lost a war. The Zalzor were conquerors, their dominion stretching across the spiral arms of the galaxy. They had reduced civilizations to dust, shattered empires that had stood for millennia, and broken species before they had the chance to resist. Humanity would be no different. Their history spoke of war, yes, but only against themselves, a squabbling, divided species that had barely set foot beyond their own moon. Vexer's second-in-command, subjugated Thales, watched the data stream scrolling across the holo-display. Minimal orbital defenses, he noted, his voice a low rasp. No planetary shield, no fleet presence. They are exposed. Vexer exhaled, a slow, deliberate sound of amusement. He turned to the communications officer. Send the transmission. A pulse of energy surged outward, carrying their message to the primitive species below. The words, translated into human tongues, were simple. We are the Zalzor. Your world now belongs to us. Surrender, and you will be spared. Seconds passed, then a full minute. Vexer waited, irritation creeping in. Had the humans already collapsed into fear? He had expected at least a token display of defiance. Then the response came. A single transmission, encrypted but decipherable, played through the command bridge. The voice was calm, deliberate. A female, perhaps a military officer. This is General Elaine Carter of the United Earth Defense Council. This is your only warning. Leave now, or suffer the consequences. Silence fell across the bridge. Thales let out a chittering laugh. Is that it? A threat? From a species that cannot even reach our ships. Vexer's mandibles twitched, but his amusement quickly turned to impatience. They do not understand their place. No matter. He turned back to his fleet commanders. Begin the bombardment. Target their largest cities. They will beg soon enough. Orders rippled through the Zalzor fleet, and fire rained from the sky. The first kinetic strikes came down like falling stars. Tungsten rods accelerated at unimaginable speeds. New York, London, Beijing, Sydney, each suffered devastating impacts. Buildings shattered, streets split open, and millions of lives were extinguished in an instant. Firestorms raged where vibrant cities had once stood. The Zalzor had seen it before, the first step in breaking a planet's will. And yet, something was wrong. The humans did not respond with desperation. There were no frantic pleas for surrender, no leaders groveling for mercy. Even the emergency transmissions coming from the burning cities contained no words of capitulation. Instead, there was only silence, followed by something far more unsettling, calm, organized coordination. Defense systems are activating, Thales muttered. Their military is mobilizing. Of course they are, Vexer said, unbothered. It changes nothing. A second wave of strikes commenced, but this time something strange occurred. The kinetic rounds never reached their targets. Satellites, ones the Zalzor had dismissed as primitive, suddenly realigned, intercepting the incoming projectiles with precise countermeasures. Point defense systems hidden within the planet's infrastructure came online, shooting down threats with startling efficiency. Thales hissed, his claws tightening around the control panel. Impossible. Vexer narrowed his gaze. Perhaps humanity was more resourceful than anticipated, but no matter. Resources alone did not win wars. He would see to their final destruction personally. Prepare the ground forces, he ordered. We will take the planet by force. Yet even as the fleet readied its descent, a strange unease settled over the command bridge. This conquest was not proceeding as expected. The humans had warned them, and they had refused to listen. The fires of invasion still raged, but Earth did not break. In the ruins of cities, Beneath the weight of fallen towers and shattered streets, humanity moved with quiet purpose. Across the planet, military command centers, once hidden in the depths of mountains and the shadows of deep oceans, flickered to life. Networks that had lain dormant for years awoke, their signals stretching across continents, linking what had been separate nations into one seamless, unyielding force. In a war room buried deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, General Elaine Carter stood before a sprawling holographic display. The enemy's fleet loomed in orbit, their troop carriers descending like spears through the sky. She watched, her jaw tight, as the first waves of Zalzor forces landed across multiple continents. They moved in precise formations, confident in their superiority, just as expected. "They think we're like every other species they've conquered," Carter murmured. "They think they've already won." A voice at her side, sharp with restrained fury, cut in. "Then it's time to disabuse them of that notion." Colonel David Ramon, his uniform still dusted with ash from the wreckage of Washington, D.C., studied the enemy's deployment patterns. He had seen the devastation firsthand, but he had also seen something else: the quiet resolve in the eyes of the survivors. People didn't flee in terror. They picked up rifles. They prepared. Carter nodded. "Initiate Project Hades." Full deployment. Across the planet, humanity's response began in earnest. The first attacks came from the shadows. Hidden strike teams, enhanced with cybernetic augmentations and cloaked by experimental camouflage, moved with surgical precision through enemy encampments. They sabotaged communication relays, severing the invaders' coordination. Zalzor officers, accustomed to absolute control, found their forces scattered, their orders lost in a sudden sea of static. At sea, submarines that had never been acknowledged by any government surfaced, launching payloads of hypersonic missiles toward enemy landing zones. In the skies, fighter jets, retrofitted with salvaged alien technology from past encounters, danced through the clouds, cutting through the enemy's aerial squadrons with impossible maneuverability. But the most devastating counterattack came not from weapons, but from within the very systems the Zalzor relied upon. Deep within an underground complex in Switzerland, a team of specialists worked in near silence, their eyes flicking between lines of cascading code. At the heart of their efforts was an artificial intelligence, one designed not just to counter an invasion, but to take control of it. "Execution in 3, 2, 1, a technician whispered. At that moment, chaos erupted within the Zalzor fleet. The invaders' own targeting systems turned against them, mistaking friendly ships for threats. Docking clamps disengaged at random, sending unprepared troops spilling into the void. Shield generators fluctuated, leaving entire sections of their fleet exposed. In the heart of the vanguard of ruin, alarms screamed as control panels flickered and died. High Commander Vexer lashed out in fury, slamming a clawed fist against a console. "What is happening?" Tallies, his face dark with confusion, struggled to make sense of the data streams. "Our systems, our own systems, are betraying us." Vexer turned his gaze toward the planet below, his cold certainty beginning to waver. The humans had not fought like this in the opening hours of battle. They had endured. They had learned. And now they were striking back with a vengeance. On the ground, the Zalzor forces found themselves facing an enemy they had not anticipated. Their technology was superior, their weapons designed to cut through the soldiers of lesser species with ease. But humans did not fight as expected. They did not form neat battle lines, nor did they retreat in the face of overwhelming firepower. They struck from unseen vantage points, disappearing into tunnels and ruins, reappearing where the enemy least expected them. A battalion of Zalzor warriors moved through the ruins of Beijing, their armor gleaming beneath the eerie glow of burning skyscrapers. They had been sent to secure the city, but something was wrong. Their sensors flickered. Their communications were unreliable. Then, without warning, the streets came alive. Explosions erupted from beneath their feet as concealed charges detonated, sending soldiers flying. From the wreckage, human forces emerged, some clad in advanced exoskeletons, others wielding weapons that seemed to bend physics itself. A single squadron, vastly outnumbered, cut through the invaders with ruthless precision, their movements synchronized as if guided by an unseen hand. The Zalzor recoiled, their cohesion crumbling. Their war doctrine had not prepared them for an enemy that refused to be subjugated. In Cheyenne Mountain, Carter watched the reports come in. Every theater of war showed the same pattern. Zalzor dominance turning to confusion, to losses, to full retreat. How long until they realize they've lost control? Rahman asked. Carter exhaled slowly. Not long. But the real question is, what will they do when they do? High above the earth, Vexor's fury burned hotter than the stars. His forces were faltering. His fleet was compromised. And for the first time in his life, he tasted something unfamiliar. Doubt. The Zalzor had expected conquest. They had expected submission. What they had not expected was wrath. Across the burning cities of Earth, their forces were in disarray. The precision of their war doctrine, honed over centuries of conquest, was failing. Their commanders could not understand how a species so seemingly primitive had turned the tide. The humans fought like no enemy before them, not with the orderly formations of lesser civilizations, but with relentless, unpredictable brutality. In the ruins of Berlin, a Zalzor platoon moved cautiously through the skeletal remains of a once great avenue, their weapons scanning the darkness. They had been sent to reinforce their dwindling ground presence, but the silence that surrounded them felt wrong. There should have been screams, the sound of resistance crumbling. Instead, there was only waiting. Then the shadows erupted. From alleyways and collapsed structures, human soldiers poured forth. They did not march in neat lines, did not hesitate to strike. They swarmed with a terrifying efficiency, moving as if they had studied the enemy's every weakness. Zalzor warriors, taller and stronger, found themselves overwhelmed by smaller foes who refused to fight fair. Explosives were placed where their armor was weakest. Blades struck in the gaps of their exosuits. Some human soldiers fought with weapons reverse-engineered from the Zalzor's own fallen. Others wielded nothing but sheer determination. A Zalzor captain, wounded and disoriented, fell back against a broken column, gasping through mandibles slick with his own blood. His squad was gone. His enemies did not offer him a chance to surrender. A single human approached, visor reflecting the fires around them, and raised their rifle. The last thing the captain saw was the flash of muzzle fire. In London, a different battle unfolded, not of weapons, but of the mind. Deep beneath the city, inside a repurposed metro station, intelligence operatives worked in near silence, their fingers moving over keyboards with practiced speed. The Zalzor had always relied on control. Their soldiers functioned as a singular unit, each action dictated by precise orders relayed through a vast, interwoven command structure. That strength had now become their weakness. The operatives did not just jam signals. They rewrote them. False directives whispered through the Zalzor ranks, turning squads against one another. Panic spread. Warriors turned on their own officers, believing them to be compromised. Entire platoons walked into ambushes that had never been planned, following orders that had never been given. At sea, the last remnants of the Zalzor's orbital supremacy crumbled. Human warships, once considered obsolete, moved with newfound lethality. Their missiles no longer simply sought heat signatures. They anticipated evasive maneuvers, adapting mid-flight. Submarines, once meant for earthly conflicts, had been rearmed with weapons capable of tearing through alien hulls. One by one, the Zalzor's landing craft were obliterated, cutting off reinforcements to the struggling ground forces. General Carter stood in the command center, watching it all unfold. Reports streamed in, Zalzor encampments falling, their forces retreating into disorganized pockets. What had begun as a planetary assault had devolved into desperate survival. She had expected their resolve to break. What she had not expected was what happened next. Ramon approached her, face grim. "We're picking up energy surges from orbit. The vanguard of ruin is repositioning." Carter turned sharply to the main display. The enemy flagship was no longer holding position. It was moving, angling toward the planet's surface. Not an evacuation, not a retreat, a final act of destruction. Vexor's voice, cold and devoid of arrogance, came through intercepted channels. "If we cannot have this world, then neither shall you." The realization struck like a physical blow. If they could not conquer Earth, they would annihilate it. The Zalzor had never before needed such an act of desperation, but never before had they faced extinction at the hands of their prey. Carter's hand clenched into a fist. "Not on our watch." Orders went out. The last phase of resistance was no longer about survival. It was about ending the invasion for good. Fighters scrambled. Missiles were primed, and in the depths of the planet, the final weapon humanity had kept in reserve, one the Zalzor had never even considered, came online. The war was not over, but soon it would be. The vanguard of ruin descended, its engines burning with the fury of a species unwilling to accept defeat. Earth's surface loomed closer, its atmosphere beginning to lick against the warship's hull. If Vexor could not rule this world, he would ensure it became nothing more than a smoldering ruin. From the command deck, he watched as the remaining Zalzor ships followed suit, their bombardment systems priming for total planetary annihilation. His fleet had suffered an unthinkable disgrace, but this final act would restore their name to legend. Let history remember the humans not as victors, but as ashes. Yet, even now, the humans did not plead. There were no cries for mercy, no desperate negotiations. Only action. Across the world, launch sites activated. Missile silos buried in mountains and deep beneath the oceans roared to life, unleashing payloads that streaked skyward in fiery arcs. Space-based railguns, hidden among what the Zalzor had dismissed as outdated satellites, came online, locking onto the descending targets. High in orbit, stations once used for research powered up, their true purpose revealed. Orbital weapons platforms designed for the day humanity faced annihilation. And still, the final weapon had yet to be deployed. On the surface, in a facility buried beneath Antarctica, scientists and military engineers stood around a single control panel, waiting for the command. The Zalzor had underestimated Earth. They had assumed humanity's technological limitations. What they had not accounted for was the human ability to plan for the worst. Carter's voice came through the secure channel, calm and steady. "Execute Ragnarok." With a single keystroke, the order was carried out. In orbit, the Zalzor ships, already struggling against the onslaught of human counterfire, suddenly found themselves blind. Their targeting systems failed, their shields flickered and collapsed, and then, one by one, their reactors began overloading. Vexor staggered as the vanguard of ruin shuddered violently. His mandibles snapped in fury. "Report!" Tallies clutched at the failing control systems, his voice a rasp of disbelief. Something is in our systems. A virus. Unlike anything we have seen, it is rewriting our ship's functions, locking us out. On Earth, the AI that had lain dormant for years, designed for this exact moment, continued its work. It did not merely disable the Zalzor's fleet. It turned their technology against them. Weapons reoriented, engines overloaded, ships, once invincible, became helpless prey. The vanguard of ruin lurched as its own thrusters ignited at full burn, but not in retreat. It was being pulled toward Earth, toward a controlled descent that would ensure its destruction. Across the fleet, the same fate played out. The invaders, who had arrived with the arrogance of conquerors, were now passengers on their own doomed vessels. Vexor refused to accept it. He reached for manual overrides, for anything that could break humanity's hold on his ship. But it was futile. The last thing he saw before the vanguard of ruin was consumed in a fiery explosion was Earth itself, untamed, defiant, and utterly beyond his grasp. The sky burned as the Zalzor fleet fell, Their warships reduced to nothing more than streaks of fire against the night. Humanity watched from the ground, from bunkers and battlefields, from the ruins of cities that had withstood the worst. In Cheyenne Mountain, Carter stood in silence as the final readings came through. The invasion was over. The warning had been given. The Zalzor had refused to listen, and now they no longer existed. Ramon exhaled, his voice quiet. Think they got the message? Carter turned from the screen, her expression unreadable. If anyone else comes, they'll already know the answer. Humanity had been underestimated. It would not happen again.